All right, welcome back. So this is secular mental health. This month we're going to do a sense of self. This was actually a very difficult one for me to narrow down and not get too complex because there's a lot of material, a lot of stuff I could choose between. But hopefully it looks good and everybody can follow along well. Next slide. So, sense of self is also known as self-concept. It's a really broad term, but generally it means is how you think about yourself, how you feel about yourself, your values, your personality, just anywhere that you can identify with yourself something. It could be just as broad as saying that you're an atheist, which actually means nothing, just that you don't believe in God, all the way to I grew up in a town and I identify with this town and the culture and go 4 or 5 hours describing it, and that defines you as your sense of self. So that being said, what I want everybody to think about is how might you define yourself? Who am I? If somebody asked you that, or you asked that of yourself, what would you say to describe yourself to somebody else? Me personally, I will often say that I'm a humanist existentialist, because I feel like that really identifies who I am, encapsulates a lot of my values, my personality, and most of the way I think fits in there. Anybody else have something they might define themselves as, or who they are?
Pragmatic rationalist.
I would say existentialist as well,
Yeah.
humanist.
But I could also define myself as a skier, as a sailor,
Uh-huh.
as a thinker.
Mm-hmm.
Depends on the context.
Maybe who you're around, maybe the situation. Yeah, that actually is a concept about that's a self-conceptualization. You may change how you present yourself depending on situations. Does anybody identify as, say, white? Would they define themselves as white? Say, for example, I'm clearly white, Caucasian. Do I define myself as white typically? I personally don't a lot. However, it is a truth about me. So in certain contexts, I should probably admit to that, depending on the situation, for sure.
Definitely context where I do that. I'll say, like, is this cishet white guy? This is what, you know.
Right.
I wouldn't describe myself as a bald.
Yeah.
You know, certainly lots of people identify me that way, but that is not something that is particularly important in my self-concept.
I like what you said there. That is so relevant to this. And I think that is probably why I don't also identify as white or describe myself as. It is true. However, how I go about my daily life, I don't necessarily identify with a lot of maybe what culture identifies as white. I don't derive purpose and meaning from it. So that's interesting. But maybe my ancestors, maybe. I don't know. Maybe I could say something there. Yeah.
I think that was an interesting example, the idea of what other people do and how other people treat us.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody might approach you, might see you and identify you as bald. Then I think maybe the question becomes, does them identifying you as bald impact how they treat you, or what your experience is in the community?
Mm-hmm.
So that might be one of the criteria for an identifying factor. Like what factors about us are sort of incidental,
Mm-hmm.
and which ones are impactful.
Mm-hmm. Might affect us more depending on the culture and circumstances we're in.
Mm.
We're actually going to cover that a little bit. I think that's a really, really important point to make. Because what we think we are and what our culture and society says we are sometimes is very different. And we have to deal with that. So How would we define ourselves? Is that a more complex question, or would you use the same thing when you say, who am I, or how would I define myself? Would you go into more detail?
Well, I would ask a question to you.
Mhm.
How would I define myself to myself
Mm-hmm.
or to other people?
Good question. Yeah.
So that changes. I'd say again, it's highly context dependent.
Mm-hmm.
I was just at a meeting 2 days ago where a guy came up to me and said, "Wow, you ask some hard questions." Well, yeah, I do ask hard questions, and I'm not sure I would define myself that way,
Mm.
but certainly other people define me that way.
Mhm.
And other people want to simply tell their story. I don't think I need to tell my story. I don't know that I have a story that needs telling.
Mm.
But I'm certainly interested in asking questions to find out more about what your story is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and especially also, if we're trying to define ourselves, do we define ourselves more by what we think other people think about us, or what we think about ourselves? Yourself, and both are true. You can define yourself based on your environment. You can define yourself based on your culture, or you can be a person that more so just defines yourself based on like intellectual ideas, more singular, independent ideas. Yeah, and that's totally fine. And that is kind of the point of this, is to recognize who you define yourself as, and possibly also grow it larger. You know, make yourself more into who you think you are. That's why we explore these things. Next question: what is my worldview? Yeah, again, it's context specific. And if we're going to be in a space that people have started a conversation about, say, politics, we're probably going to steer towards those political views, and we're going to probably have a worldview that we have an opinion on. Why is a worldview important for sense of self? Your worldview should line up with who you are, because if it doesn't, you probably will find yourself in a cognitive dissonant state, or a way of thinking something seems wrong, and why am I doing this? I think we can think of some people who have political opinions, however, it doesn't seem to align with who it seems like they are. And that's a person that probably needs to explore their sense of self a little closer. So next question, how do I think, make decisions, and determine meaning and value in my life? There's a lot more questions there, but that is more than your sense of self, but it's part of it. How you think is highly relevant and important. Do you only act on what you've learned from your life, like what you learned from your childhood into teenage years, and you've just basically gone through the motions since then? Or have you tried to alter that to make yourself better as a person? Have you actually questioned, well, I don't think that was a good lesson I learned from my parents, maybe I should do it a different way? It's a good question to ask, and I wanted to frame this out so that we can kind of explore it, and have it as like a side example. This is a way of framing it, or a way of looking at kind of what I'm getting at with a sense of self, or a conception of yourself. From the point that you're born, there are biological things that affect who you might have, or what you might have as a sense of self. And it grows in a progression. We've done lots of research and studies, and there's a kind of a systematic way that our brains grow, and we interact with the environment, and we learn things. So the biology of how we are grows from here, and how we might identify ourselves. What we then use to have a sense of self is based on our environment, and what we learned. And we also learn skills of interpreting our environment, our cognition, how we look at things. So this is a symbol or a chart that I regularly use to explain different psychological concepts, but I think it's nice and simplified, especially in this conception. If we can imagine all of this that we learn and grow into, develop into, all of this is unconscious in this area. This area is conscious, how we interpret all this here. So we use some of our cognition, some of what we learned in the environment to gain interpretations and perceptions. So the sense of self is technically all this, but when we identify ourselves, it's actually right here. What we think we are is in this part of our mind where we have an idea or a conception of ourselves, but it doesn't actually exist in reality. Some people only react and go based on what their environment is, and they don't actually try to get a sense of self. I think that's an important thing to understand when we have a question of why some people act the way that they do. That kind of explains why that happens. People are mostly reacting and doing what they learned, but not actually thinking, is this wrong? Next slide. Okay, so this looks like a lot, but it is meant to be helpful to explore probably the most important conception of how you come to define yourself the way that you do. I'm using Brofenbrenner's ecological theory. This theory is meant to gain a perspective on how you environmentally have learned to be who you are. It's not so much about the cognition or your critical thinking or any of those concepts. It's about what has shaped you to be who you are today. So the right way to look at the circles is these are circles of influence, and every influence, the closer to the center they are, the more influence they have on you, and the more you go out to the edges, there's an influence, but it's more of like a broad influence on your life. Our development and understanding of ourselves is learned and dependent on our lived experiences. So the first one is the microsystem. That is our experiences with the people that are in the most proximal environment around us. People, places, and things that we regularly interact with minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. The mesosystem is the interactions and influence between the closest people, places, and things in your life. So how does your mom interact with your brother? How does that affect you? Your parents went to work, they had a stressful work day, they bring that stress back home when they interact with you. Your cats play on the floor and it's fun to watch and it makes you happy, and that affects how you perceive that day or that moment. So that's mesosystem. All the things in your environment, how it interacts with each other. The exosystem is the social settings environment that influences the people that we interact with. So this is describing more so things that we don't directly interact with, but it's things that other people deal with. So say your mom has a bad relationship with her parents and they have a life history dealing with the stress and arguments, and on a particular occasion they argued, came home, and your mom is very angry and upset with you. That would be an exosystem situation where something affected them that then they interact with you. Then the macro system, the cultures that we experience. So the macro system is all the different expectations and pressures and stresses, benefits and issues that occur in society. Everything from racism, sexism, the type of government we have, to whether you're able to get a student loan, anything like that is a more broad stress and pressure on your life. And then the chronos system is those things in your environment that are historical events that are happening while you're alive. So somebody that was alive during COVID definitely had a certain stressed environment from that somebody that lived, say, in the 50s didn't have the same experience. Just like somebody lived in World War II, we don't know what that's like. But that definitely had a significant effect on their life. So, I know that seems very complex, but the point is that if we're going to try to understand ourselves, we're going to need to understand how dynamic and complex we are. It's not going to be, oh, I'm an existentialist, which is actually a very complex answer, to be honest, or that I'm white. It's a very binary, very nondescript example of who I am. This is going to get into more specifically how I've shaped myself into who I am today. If I go back and examine all those different effects on my life, I'm going to have a much better picture, a more clear picture of how things came to be. So what I want everybody to do now is we're going to do the exercise now. What I want you to do is try to think of influences on your life for each one of those circles. So microsystem for me would definitely be my mom, my dad, and my two brothers when I was younger. So, which is an important point to make. Why am what am I trying to put in my circle? That is relevant when I was younger. That is no longer my microsystem. My current microsystem is my wife, my cats. That's what it is now. And they have far more influence on me than my parents do now. So when you're answering the question, answer it for either now or maybe historically how you've experienced stuff to the point you are right now. So I'll give you some minutes to answer the questions. Okay, so let's explore the different ideas and conceptions. This is meant to be practice, and the truth of it is you're going to actually be able to find a really long list of for each one of these concentric circles. So for me, microsystem, like I said before, I would be more likely to use now my current state, my wife and cats, as opposed to when I was younger, because how I'm affected now is more dynamically important and has been more bigger effect than my parents did at this point. Not at 20 though. It definitely was my parents. So anybody want to give any examples?
So microsystems. I was the firstborn child of a young mother, an older father, just back from World War II, so lots and lots of that dynamic. They lived with her parents for a while, so a lot of interaction with those two grandparents. Not my father's grandparents, or not my father's parents. So I would say that was a strong micro influence at that time. All those people now gone. So current microsystem, I don't know how I would particularly define that. Clearly, my partner of decades, my girlfriend, but we are not together all the time. So consequently, I spend time in a philosophy group, I spend time in other, the political group, different things.
Mhm.
So again, I don't know if I would call that a microsystem or a mesosystem. Clearly, my girlfriend would be in a microsystem, I would think, even though I don't spend all my time with her.
Mhm.
She is probably the most significant influence in my life.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's the reason they split them up the way that they did is to try to account for specific things like interactions. With the mesosystem, it's more about the interactions between the people that are closest to you. So I think in your case, if you regularly hang out with people in groups, it might be your microsystem. Typically, when they first worked on this, I think they mean it more for child development. But the truth is, it can be used in almost any stage of life, which a lot of people do for stuff. And I think in those cases, we do have more broken up relationships as adults, and I think we can count people that are at least regularly we interact with. I think that makes sense. Anybody that's got significant influence on your life, that's what it's meant for. Anybody else for a microsystem?
So the same thing as you,
Yeah.
Josh.
That is true.
And my animals.
So let's move to a mesosystem then. Yeah, so mesosystem's more about the interactions with the people in our close environment. So in my situation, my cats playing with each other on the floor would guess kind of count, but I think they mean more like a social dynamic, significant interactions. So maybe me interacting with Jen's parents. I think that's a big interaction, which may affect how I feel about that, how she feels about that. So that affects our mood and how we're feeling, good or bad. So that's kind of what that's meant for more so. Recognizing that is very helpful, especially in a relationship. So you realize, okay, I'm a little upset about somebody I worked with, and they got me pissed off. I need a little time to take a break before we talk this evening. Being aware of that could really help in a relationship. Any other ideas for mesosystem?
Yeah, I
interactions?
said work stress,
Mm-hmm.
family stress, and positive friends, having a really good, close-knit group of friends and like-minded individuals for that support and connectiveness.
Right.
Just a question of clarification. If we're working full-time, that's 40 hours a week. So would even the people we work with be part of our micro and mesosystem?
I totally think that's what we should look at it as, because it's whoever you have so much interaction with that it does affect how you think, feel, perceive yourself, especially work. I mean, I think probably all of us have we put on a different role, different hat when we go to work than we would with our family and friends. So it's good to recognize, especially for your 40 hours in a work environment. So yeah, I think that's a good example. So let's go to exosystem. So exosystem is more about people that you interact with, their experiences with others that you don't have experience with. So say, but you may feel that at some point. So say, a friend of ours definitely had a negative interaction with somebody that's a racist online. I didn't personally experience that. However, it definitely would upset them. And then I might have a conversation or see that they feel, pain and suffering from it. And I feel a certain kind of way about that, so that's affecting me. But it didn't actually happen directly to me. So that's the way to look at the exosystem. How the people we interact with, how they have to deal with life. Stressors.
Okay, I have a question. Where would you put the political climate? Is that exosystem? Because clearly, you know, I have a lot of interaction with people who are, you know, my girlfriend, her major point of stress is the political climate. So when Trump does something really ridiculous, disgusting, that affects her, and then she comes to me and says, man, I'm pissed off, I'm angry, you know, I'm having a problem, and so that affects me,
Mhm.
but it isn't an immediate experience for me,
Mhm.
but it clearly has an effect on me.
Yeah, that's an example of an exosystem. Anything that somebody has positive or negative interactions with people, places, things, culture, but you didn't experience it directly, but you definitely feel the emotions or you have to interact with them after the event. Yeah, that's the way to look at exosystem. Because they're all affecting each other. That's the way to look at this. Our whole life is not a vacuum. We're dealing with a lot of different ideas and situations at all times. Some of them more than others. Some people more than others. So yeah, exosystem is how people we interact with, how they're experiencing life. Then the macro system, that's how things like racism, politics, our society, how that affects us and everybody, and the culture, and affects, say, how laws are made, you know. So critical race theory, for example, the whole idea is that racism is so pervasive, it has affected all of our laws over hundreds of years, to the point that some wouldn't say directly, oh, that's a racist law, but if you follow the history and look at it, you can see that it's racist. You can see the underpinnings and where it started from. What is that? The 60 vote? I forgot what that one's called. The
Civil rights movement?
No, you have to get 60 votes to.
Yeah, the filibuster.
Has a racist origin story, for example. Yeah, so a lot of these ideas that now affect all of us, affects politics, affects these various ideas, that is the macro system. Good and bad. Another way of looking at macro system is white privilege. So a lot of white people in America definitely have a lot of privilege, again, because of laws, because of experience, and because of money and power, how it's shaped. So a lot of white people have a lot less to deal with than other people, marginalized people in America. That's a macro system effect. Anybody have any other examples of macro system?
Having conservative parents.
Yeah, that would-
Politics.
Yeah, politics. And they were affected by the macro system as well. What they watch, what they interact with, all that is affecting people. Yeah, speaking of people, researchers and theorists would put social media in the macro system. I personally think, and we can debate this, but I think it actually is in all of them, because it could be figured out in each situation how it might affect you, including the microsystem. I would make the argument, if you spend more time on your cell phone than you do with your significant other, you literally, the phone relationship is more important to you than the significant other. So I think that's relevant and should be thought about, because it's highly influential.
Where would you place your AI bot?
Same. It's a matter of time, proximity and time, which I'll cover in one of our future events, sessions. Yeah, proximity and time. That's another way to look at this. Whatever you spend the most time with and the most proximity with, that will influence you the most. That's why the center circle originally meant, and for all intents and purposes, you generally spend the most time with your family. However, some situations don't allow that to happen. It's good to recognize that. And digital media, AI bot, some people spend way too much time on digital media, playing video games, say. You know, how is that? I mean, some people might want to put it in the macro system, but I mean, if 20 hours a day, come on. So thinking about that and your influences, that's the whole point of this. And then the chrono system. Again, politics could be up there, but it's better to look at it as the global events that are affecting a lot of different people. Those being, COVID's a great example, obviously. But even a person or policy that seems done by an administration could be the same. If it affects a lot of people in very significant ways, that would be in a chrono system where somebody might not have experienced that, say in the 90s or something like that. So it's a very different experience right now. Any other examples?
Where would you put something like the big hurricane, the earthquake?
Oh, yeah.
You know, the wildfire that burned the house down?
Totally, that's chronosphere.
Cronus.
Yeah, that would be a big historical event. If you were in a fire, if you were in a hurricane, you know, Katrina to wherever, those people had serious traumatic events from that. Whereas if you weren't in that, you weren't living there, you didn't have that same experience. So it's looking at what shaped your life. Chronosphere-wise, if you experienced that, that probably had a significant effect on your sense of self.
For me, I said post 9/11 because I was in college then, and seeing the ideology completely change, and I think that really gravitated me towards more to the left politically, and the us or them ideology. Those were dark years.
You're either with us
And
or
then
you're against it,
Iraq
or you're
war,
terrorists.
worried about my friends going to war and dying.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that
Yeah.
definitely shaped my ideology.
yeah, for sure. Any other chronosphere examples? Civil rights movement. A lot of those were really important things that occurred for the United States, but if people didn't live during that time, some people may take it for granted now as well, which is unfortunate. There's a lot of people that fought real hard, and might still have to keep fighting for it. So anyway, so that's a breakdown of all the parts of the ecological theory. Looking at that, does that change the way that you guys define your sense of self? Has it maybe clarified anything? Do you feel like it's helpful to kind of look at your history, your experiences?
I think it's helpful to see it's multi-layered and complex.
Right, yeah. Maybe there were more than just what somebody might judge us for. Yeah. So now I'm going to open it up to kind of challenging thoughts. Next screen. So what if what you learned growing up did not align or work with who you think you are? Can anybody think of something you might have learned as a child that may not work so well now in your life?
I think for me, my mom was reluctant. She didn't want me to get close to people and afraid of being hurt. And I chose not to do that. I chose to have very close friends growing up, but limited because I've always been introverted. And I think that's definitely served me well because I feel like I have a really good core group of close-knit friends that if I didn't work on those relationships, I would feel lonely. I wouldn't be able to share experiences with and do certain things. So I appreciate appreciate that I unlearned that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing.
So I'm trying to figure how this would work. So I was born in a rural community, limited in a lot of ways. Again, similar to being a fat kid, I thought, yeah, this doesn't seem like this is going to work. I need to broaden my experience. Never was in sports as a young person, just didn't do that at all. I mean, my dad, he played golf and was a bowler, and I thought, yeah, that doesn't seem that attractive. So I pushed myself into other things. I became a swimmer, I became a rower, I became a skier, lots of other things, sailing. Again, my motivation there, I think, was just to expand my horizons.
Did you start to identify as a rower and a sailor and all that?
Well, I don't know that would be a big part of that. It's like being bald, when I'm sailing, then I'm a sailor.
Mm-hmm.
People would say in the middle of the summer, don't you miss skiing? I said, not particularly, it's summer. And so I don't know that I would call that a part of my identity, but it's certainly a big significant impact on my self-concept. So I don't know how you would look at that. I don't know where you would put that.
Well, that would be changing up your experiences what you experienced when you're younger. You didn't just go into just reacting and doing exactly the same thing that you did before. You actually broadened your horizons. You went to other places. And then the truth of it is, we probably could find a word that you'd be all right with to describe that. You were exploring. Maybe you were curious and you were engaging in your curiosity. You had you actually wanted to get more physically active. You wanted to do it for health. You wanted to do it for yourself. Any of those things would be in this area of like conscious intent. You're trying to do something different.
So the original question was something in our childhood that we learned that doesn't work for us now?
Right.
Oh, wow, okay, I can go a little deeper on that one then. Having alcoholic parents, I grew up learning to be kind of emotionally self-sufficient, self-contained, and then somewhere in not super recent years, but not as early as I wish it would have been, I realized that behavior I learned was actually isolating me and keeping me from making good connections with other human beings.
Yeah, that's a great example.
What protected me as a child was actually harming me as an adult.
Yeah. And then you've kind of started to focus on that
Right.
and change that. Again, as an example, you've learned certain ways of coping skills, like how to deal with alcoholic parents, your environment, being around the alcoholics and kind of being familiar with it. If you just went with your unconscious reactions, you'd probably be doing that to this day. And this is actually where free will comes involved. Some people debate about free will. This is where either you're acting on free will or not. Non-free will is you just do things based on unconscious reasons. Free will is intent. You actually try to do it differently. Despite all of your experiences and what you've had happen to you, you intend to do it differently. And the more you practice that, that might actually change how you think about it and your current environment, which may overtake all the memories and the emotions you had
Yeah,
in the past.
what I used to see as strength, I now see as like, not maybe necessarily weakness, but overcompensation.
Right. I actually, I've changed a lot since I was a kid, and it might be a joke, but it's not. But I often say I've changed about 80% of who I might have identified with as a child. And there's some times where I'll look back at my childhood and I'm not sure who I'm looking at anymore. Just because I've identified so many things I did not want. This is something I engaged in a lot throughout my life. I was willing to challenge myself and keep pushing myself to be different from those experiences. In particular and relevant to secular community, religion, and what they taught me about that was not going to work for me. And in fact, I think it was dysfunctional. Spirituality, seeing things in a woo kind of way, like if there's a shadow over here, maybe it's a spirit, it's a ghost. Once I started to reject the idea that there's spirits and ghosts everywhere, I stopped jumping all the time when I actually noticed this the other day when, well, about 10 years ago I noticed, but now I kind of think about it more. I'll take the garbage out to the corner and it's dark out. When I was younger, head on a swivel, scared. But about 10 years ago, because I kept working on my superstitions, just removing them, eliminating them, meditation, CBT, RBT, just working on different therapeutic ways of looking at it, it's not there anymore. Now I only fear like the things that are the only things you fear, which were humans. So otherwise, it's the only dangerous thing anymore. My sense of self, because of that, has expanded really, really dynamically since then. So now, because I have a good, strong sense of self, it's more difficult to lose confidence in certain situations if somebody judges me. I do know who I am, but I'm also receptive to try to meet them where they're at. This is really important as a counselor, especially. But also, I don't need other people to judge me, and it may be coming from a different perspective, but the same way out for me. I need to not judge somebody else because I have not lived their same experiences. So I'm more willing and open to hear as much as I can from their lived life, because this is what I'm thinking about. What is their sense of self? That's what we'll be working on. And
yeah, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
It seems to what you're describing there, I wonder why you put perception below interpretation. It seems like
Well-
you need the perception first, and then you have to have the interpretation.
that's fair. I just put it on there.
Oh, okay.
That's-
So
I'm
that's
consider-
not significant.
I just mean it to be the same thing that
Okay.
this is where the interpretations happen. Interpretations do not happen in the unconscious. That is better seen as dynamic reactions and interactions with neurobiological processes. Any neurobiologist focuses on this stuff, and that's why they say we don't have free wills. But they're not focusing on this stuff that we can't really measure as easily. Our concepts of ourselves, our perceptions of ourselves. In fact, many people that define things as spiritual are probably out here as well. It's not measurable stuff. But what they're probably talking about is their feelings about and their perceptions of things, connections to others, themselves. That's their conceptions at that point. So I wanted to give at least one good example. Somebody that I worked with could you turn back to the other screen? I had a client once where the only reason they came to my office was because of the culture and religion that they were brought up into. So the issue that I got them a year after a lot of incidents happened, but the background is they had tried to commit suicide and nobody could tell why. Put inpatient, got some counseling, they gained confidence, and during that counseling they came to find that they were actually part of the LGBTQ community, and they were starting to say to themselves, this is who I am, on this topic of sense of self. Why did she try to kill herself? Would be a question there. So she started to get more confident, and then her mother wanted to know what's been going on. Why are you feeling more confident? And she came out to her mother. Her mother kicked her out of the house because the mother and where they'd been going was a evangelical church that rejected anything, everything LGBTQ, living in sin to fire and brimstone. The mother believed that, and the person started to believe it as well about themselves. So microsystem affected mother, mesosystem interaction with other people in the church, and macrosystem, the church and religious beliefs, basically were telling her that they could not be who they were. So kicked out of the house, went into foster. I got them back a year later, and the question was presented to me, should they be reunited in the original home? And the irony of it was she didn't meet any diagnostic criteria at that point, and I quite literally could only say this was because of religion. It was a specific example where they could not identify themselves as who they really were as long as they stayed in that community. And we all know that's happening with a lot of people in our community as well. So I think that's probably one of the stronger examples I've ever had. I can relate, to be honest. I was rejected for a lot of reasons that I didn't accept the religious status quo. But when you focus on your sense of self and find the communities that actually match with you, find your microsystems, people that actually do support you, and move and be more in proximity and time with them, you're going to be able to be more likely to grow and develop into your true sense of self. So yeah, I wanted to definitely give that one. That's a that's a hard one, which I mean, it's facts. Like, that's the problem. That person's problem was their ecological system that they were under. It was preventing them from being themselves. Excuse me. So, last page. So that is it for today. Other than question discussions. Next month will be on purpose and meaning. So I wanted to cover the 4 existential dreads, because these are the tough ones that everybody has to deal with, including the secular community. I like working on them. They're important, and we should all learn how to come to terms with them. And so the resources here, if you want to learn more about some of what I talked about today, they covered more of the ecological theory, and they covered more of the sense of self. And these are my school books where I got a lot of this information from.